instead of clamping down on the Russians, who we know tampered with our election, what's the president doing? Well, he's going after the investigators who are trying to figure out what was going on during the campaign. He's ratcheting up the rhetoric and also the investigation of those investigators. Then an escalation in the battle between Donald Trump and Nancy Pelosi. Things appear to be going from bad to worse. Also, one of Bill de Blasio's biggest critics will weigh in on the mayor's presidential run, but also Pat Lynch. He's head of not only the NYPD's biggest union, but he's also going to tell us about the move to punish cop killers. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Thanks for joining us this Friday. President Trump ramping up his push to probe the origins of the Mueller probe, and now he's ordering U.S. intelligence organizations to work with the Attorney General on just that. Quickly and fully cooperate. That is the message President Trump has given U.S. intelligence agencies as he signed an executive order granting Attorney General William Barr sweeping authority to review how the Russia probe into the Trump campaign got started.
Everything that they need is declassified, and they'll be able to see how this how the hoax or witch hunt started and why it started. It was an attempted coup or an attempted takedown of the President of the United States.
And Barr now has the ability to declassify information as he sees fit, including documents historically deemed the most secret, like FISA warrants. Last month, when asked about the origins of the Mueller report,
I am not saying that improper surveillance occurred. I'm saying that I am concerned about it and looking into it.
His own FBI director, however.
Do you have any evidence that any illegal surveillance into the campaigns or individuals associated with the campaigns by the FBI occurred?
I don't think I personally have any evidence of that sort.
Adam Schiff, chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, responding to Trump's executive order, tweeting, Trump and Barr conspire to weaponize law enforcement and classified information against their political enemies, while the House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler called it nonsense on MSNBC.
And what they're really trying to do is to divert attention from the Mueller report and from the president's actions against the rule of law to an imaginary scandal.
Plus, there is news about Bob Mueller. We've been telling you about his reticence to testify with the cameras rolling. Now, House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler says Mueller, he wants to speak with his committee, but he wants to do so behind closed doors. Mueller and Nadler's panel are now negotiating. And joining us now is former federal prosecutor Daniel Alonso. Let me start off with the premise of the president now investigating the investigators, more aptly having William Barr do this and have all of the intel be participatory. Yet the head of the DNI issue a cautionary note, and that's an appointee of the president himself, saying, be careful here. To that end, the idea of weaponizing law enforcement against a political enemy, shouldn't that concern us?
As a general matter, sure. You have to always worry whether law enforcement is being used for political ends, whether somebody is, say, an elected district attorney or a U.S. attorney appointed by the president or the law enforcement apparatus of the U.S., FBI, et cetera. You need to deal with cases on the merits, and you need to deal with individual cases as they come. That said, presidents do have prerogative to decide law enforcement priorities. And strictly speaking, the president has the right to order the attorney general to investigate things. Sometimes we would think that is completely benign, like some natural disaster or some shooting or something like that, or a terrorist act. And other times it's controversial, like here.
But it's so diversionary. I mean, I don't care who you voted for or whatever else. The idea that there is unanimity, maybe with the exception of the president, that Russia did intentionally and successfully interfere with our elections, that you want to find the genesis of that with all the outstanding questions and probes that are going on right now. That is issue one for the president and the AG. I mean, William Barr, explain to our audience, I've said this many times, he had earned a reputation, forget about whether you like his politics or not, as a very serious member of the judiciary. Now, the idea that he so nakedly, it seems to the general public, is playing politics, both with that 9:30 press conference before we get the Mueller report and every day thereafter. I still don't get why, Daniel. Why would he do that, given that he conducted a career that seems to run so counter from the recent actions?
Well, there are a few possible explanations for why the attorney general is interested in investigating this. I mean, the most sinister, of course, is that he's trying to do the president's bidding, and he's the answer to the president's question, "Where's my Roy Cohn?" Roy Cohn, of course, being a notorious New York lawyer who got disbarred. And the more benign is that Barr is somebody who is an advocate on the sort of academic sense of the unitary executive and the fact that the president has power that is, relatively less checked than many people think by the other two branches. And so, he probably, you can imagine him saying to himself, the president has the right to do this. There's nothing overtly wrong because I haven't been asked to arrest anybody or anything like that. I've just been asked to investigate. And so he's thinking to himself, okay, I'm going to investigate and let's see what happens. I agree that there might not be a good reason to spend resources on this. Usually you want investigations to have what's called predication, a real predicate. We haven't seen what that predicate is here. I'm looking forward to seeing the predicate. I'm looking forward to seeing the results of this investigation. I think it's going to happen no matter what you and I say.
And by the way, the FBI director, again, Trump's own appointee, again, has real cause or at least real pause into going down this road. Now, let's pivot to Robert Mueller. Reportedly, as we just said, he wants to talk, but he wants to do so behind closed doors. The concern that I have with that, Daniel, is in today's day and age, two people will walk out of a room and give two completely different accounts in Washington over the same conversation. Do you think, given all the skepticism and cynicism today, that you kind of need to hear it from Mueller, maybe one of the few remaining, at least perceived honest brokers in this process? And if it's translated from us through a political lens, it's not going to carry the same gravity?
Well, I mean, first of all, that's why God created the stenographer. So I think that even if it's behind closed doors, it will be recorded word for word. I recognize that that's not the same as a video, and it's not what the media and the public would prefer. But I think that Mr. Mueller has concerns, and I think rightly so, that congressional hearings tend to devolve into political circus and political theater. I'll give you just my own view is that the absolute worst way to get actual information from somebody is to spend 5 minutes going back and forth, giving political speeches and yelling at somebody, and occasionally asking a question. The members of Congress are political actors, and I don't mean any criticism by that. That's just what they're supposed to do. But a behind closed doors hearing has more of a chance of questions being asked in a calmer way, without the posturing for the cameras. Perhaps staff can get involved, and perhaps you can actually get an answer that is of some substance from Mueller. Mueller definitely does not want to be used as a political pawn by either side.
Appreciate that, but whether we like it or not, there's a theater aspect to this, and I'm concerned how things on black and white, when 90 some odd %, forget of the general public, of even Congress, I believe, haven't even read the report here. We need something dispositive here to have a little bit of clarity. Hopefully that'll come out of it. Finally, in your old life, among other things, you looked at financial crimes and money laundering. Talk about the significance of some of the recent court rulings with both the accounting firm and now possibly Deutsche Bank. Like, what are some of the things in your vantage point, Daniel, that could really be revelatory, not just that Trump doesn't have a fraction of what he says he does, but, we learned that he paid for all these properties with $400 million. Nobody knows in cash where that money came from. All of a sudden, I think in '89, there's a $53 million uptick in his returns. Again, nobody knows where the money comes from. What would be some of the financial forensics that you would love to see if, in fact, this ever comes out? And I think the president politically may be playing this wrong. This will be coming out in an election year, meaning 2020, instead of now getting it out of the way. If, in fact, it gets out, what do you think we could learn?
Well, first of all, in my current life also, I deal with money laundering and anti-money laundering quite a bit. You have to remember the difference between money laundering and anti-money laundering. So no matter how suspicious transactions look, where hundreds of millions of dollars have been transferred in shell companies or whatever the usual typologies are, you don't, unless you know where those funds came from, it's not actual money laundering, because money laundering requires knowledge and the fact of the illicit origin of the funds. So people hiding money could just mean it's tax evasion, or it could mean that it's one of many very complicated corporate transactions. So it's not money laundering just because it's very suspicious activity. That said, it can implicate anti-money laundering rules of banks. Banks are required to seek out suspicious activity inside their institutions, and if suspicious and it fits the regulations, they're supposed to report it to the Department of the Treasury. So the kinds of things that you just mentioned are exactly what banks will often, not always, it always depends, but will often report to the Treasury Department. So things like multiple transfers, shell companies, transactions without purpose, transactions that even each other out, sort of wash transactions that just serve to transfer wealth from one jurisdiction to another. All of that implicates the reporting requirements of banks under anti-money laundering. As to what we might learn if we see the president's tax returns, I mean, we'd only be speculating. We'd find out at least some of the origin of some of his income. But one thing I learned as an investigator of financial crime is you don't want to speculate until you actually get your hooks on the actual evidence.
It is more fun doing it that way, but I agree with you, Daniel. Hey, I appreciate a few minutes. I am sure next week, as every week seems to be, we'll add a few more twists and turns. Daniel Alonso, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Coming up next, we head to Washington to show you some of the top stories for our nation's capital, including a new chapter in the Trump-Pelosi feud and also U.S. troops getting deployed to the Mideast.